In this problem, we're given three graphs, and we are told that f is the parent function and that the function g and h are transformations on the function f, and we are to write formulas for g and h using proper function notation. We are assuming in this problem that the only transformations being imposed on the parent function are reflections. So g is either a reflection about the x-axis relative to the parent function or about the y-axis. So let me just pick the first one, which is a reflection about the x-axis. Here's the parent function, which is the graph of the square root function. If I were to reflect it about the x-axis, what that would mean is that I'm changing the sign on the y-coordinate, which can be thought of as if this graph was written on a piece of paper in ink and you folded the piece of paper about the x-axis, that ink would come down here after folding the piece of paper, and the new graph would look something like this. So that matches the function g. Notice the point on our parent function, 4, 2, gets transformed down here into this point whose coordinates are 4, -2. So a reflection about the x-axis can be simply thought of as changing the sign on the y-coordinate, and that's what this notation here says. F of x is the notation for the output, or the y value of a point, and we're changing the sign by putting a negative out here. Well, in terms of an equation, what that means to do is to take the equation for the parent function, which is the square root of x, and alter it in such a way that you put a negative outside the function, so that would look like this. So the equation for g of x would simply be negative square root of x. Because I'm typing this into the computer using function notation, that would look like g of x equals negative, and you can get the square root by typing sqrt of x. If you didn't know the syntax for square root, rather than typing this out, you could click the little yellow box here which opens up MathQuill. Then you click on the icon that looks like a square root, type x, and then save your answer. All that does is change the square root symbol that you just selected in MathQuill, and it converts it into computer syntax. Now for the function h, the graph of h looks like someone took the parent function and reflected about the y-axis, and one way to explain this graphically is to think of as the parent function is drawn on a piece of paper with wet ink and the piece of paper is folded about the y-axis. What would happen is this ink would fold about the piece of paper and the graph would look something like this. So notice the point here whose coordinates are 4, 2, and I know this because the square root of 4 is 2, got transformed over here into the point -4, 2. So a y-axis reflection can be thought of as taking a point on the parent function and changing the sign on the x-coordinate, and that's what this notation here says. We're not changing the sign on the output, as in the previous example. We're changing the sign on the x value, or the input variable. So taking the equation of the parent function to reflect about the y-axis, the rule is to change the sign on the x-coordinate. You do this by putting a negative in front of the input variable. So doing that here gives me the equation for h of x. My transformed function, now that I changed my parent function, we will call h, and a formula for h would be that h of x is the square root of -x, and you could type that into MathAS in a very similar way that we typed in the formula for g. I would type h of x equals, go to MathQuill, click the icon that looks like a square root, this time type -x, click the save button. Before submitting my answer, you may want to preview your answer to see that the computer is saying that the syntax is okay. Notice, had I not used function notation, when I clicked preview, it would say syntax error. My answer is no longer an equation. So the syntax h of x equals is necessary because all equations have an equal sign, and the directions said to use proper function notation, necessitating that I use function notation in my answer. I pressed the submit button to verify the computer is considering my answer to be correct, indicated by the green check mark.